In this module, we are looking at the Identity and Access Management Service on AWS IAM service. Now, the IAM service is one of the key services which AWS uses to manage identities and to manage access into environments on the AWS platform. Let's get a little bit of understanding of the AWS IAM service. Assuming you have your AWS account, let's say Wanda company account. Now, this is the account which you have on AWS. And now your company has a set of developers, cyber security experts, DevOps engineers, data scientists. They are all working for Wanda company. Now, all these constitute different class of users which you might have in your company. And these users might consist of the developers, the cybersecurity experts, the DevOps engineers, and the data scientists. Now, how do these developers, cybersecurity experts, DevOps engineers, data scientists have access to your AWS account? This means that we are looking at which users has access to what service on AWS. That means that we might have the developer maybe who needs access to we may have the developer which need access to AWS Lambda in your organization account, or we may have a DevOps engineer who needs access to cloud formation, or we might have a data engineer who needs access to Redshift. So IAM basically manages this access. Which user has access to what service on AWS? So for you to manage the users and to manage the access to various services on AWS, you do that using the Identity and Access Management Service. As far as the Identity and Access Management Service is concerned, we are looking at key things. The users, you can have one or two users put together in groups. We can have these users having access to certain resources through what we call roles. And then these roles basically are defined by policies. And then we're actually now going to see how we can manage our account using what account settings. So as far as IAM is concerned, you want to manage the users individually. Maybe developer one, maybe DevOps engineer one, and so on. So all these are the users. Now, assuming that you want all these users to be categorized in groups. So you might have maybe the developer group consisting of developers. You might have the DevOps group consisting of DevOps engineers. So groups basically help you to group these users together. Now, the roles basically grant you access to various services or access to various accounts on AWS. So as far as roles are concerned, we are looking at access to services and we are looking at access to accounts. Now, policies are the actual definitions of the access. You use policies to define the access. Who has access? Now, policies basically help us to define the access. Do they have write access in your AWS account? Do they have read access, write access? Do they have read access? Do they have read, write access? So all these determinations of or all these access requirements are defined using policies. So the policies basically enable you to allow or to deny access to certain services. So as far as policies are concerned, we are looking at how you can give write access, read access, or read write access to certain services by allowing or by denying. Now, the last thing which you also have to understand as far as IAM is concerned is the account settings, how to manage your AWS account. As far as IAM is concerned, you also need to understand multi-factor authentication for access. You equally need to understand the account settings, and this account settings basically helps you to define the password policies. So with MFA, you are granted access using different methods with multi-factor authentication, and then account policies enables you to actually configure various password policies and other policies in your environment. And lastly, you also want to look at user console and programmatic access. So if a user has console access, it means that they can access the AWS environment through the portal, or they can access the AWS environment through the command line interface. So that is basically how users can access your environment. So users can access either through the console or through the command line interface or through programmatic means of access. So by the end of this module, you should understand how to manage users, how to manage groups, how to manage roles, how to manage policies, and how to manage the account settings on the identity and access management service. Let's get right into our AWS console to have a detailed understanding of the IAM service. Once you're on the IAM dashboard, there are a lot of things which you must take note of as far as the identity and access management service on AWS is concerned. On the Amazon Web Service platform, to manage users and access which they have on the AWS platform, we have what we call access management to manage users. To view what users have been doing in the environment, we have access reports. And then equally, based on the AWS global infrastructure, we also have AWS regions which you can manage resources in. And then also based on IAM, you can also look at the user which actually has access to your account. Now, as far as IAM is concerned, you must take note of user groups, and user groups are the easiest ways which you can use to gather one or two users. Assuming that you're having one or two users in your environment, maybe developers, DevOps engineers, cybersecurity engineers, or whatever set of users that are a group, you can manage those users collectively using the user groups. And for you to create a group is simple. You click on create group and you give the group a name. You can give the name Wanda Developers Group, and this will give any user that is added to this group, and this is going to be the name of the group. Now you can add users to the group based on the number of users you have in your environment. So you can add maybe admin, you can add management user, you can add Wawa, you can add workshop, you can add Wonder user, that are all users in your environment. So you can add all these users to this group like developers. And then what resources do these users have access to, which we call policies. So for you to give users access to certain resources, you can do that using policies. So you need to add maybe a policy name to a given group, and then any user that is attached to this group will have access to these policies. And once you've added all of these, all you need to do is you create group. You create group, and once you create the group, any user that is added to that group will have access to to all the resources. So we have the Wanda group that has been created, Wanda developers group that has been created, Wanda developers group. You can view all the users, and then you can view all the permissions. The second thing which you should take note of on IAM is users. Users are the actual people who are actually using AWS. The developers, the DevOps engineers, the cybersecurity engineers, the testers, all those are categorized under users. And then we equally have roles. An IAM role is an identity you can create that has specific permissions with credentials that are valid for short duration. So if you want to give a user permissions to certain resources for a very short duration, you can do that using roles. So you also want to take note of roles as far as IAM is concerned. And for you to create a role is simple. You click on create role and then you follow the steps to create the role. And for you to create a role is simple. You click on create role. Once you're creating a role, they'll specify, are you creating a role for an AWS service? Are you creating a role for an AWS account? Are you creating the role for web identity? Are you creating the role for SML federation or for a custom trust policy? So you will always want to specify what you're creating that role for. So in this case, you are creating maybe a role for an AWS service. Now, once you choose AWS service, you must be able to specify the service use case. Do you want to use this role for EC2, for Lambda, for Grafana, for API, App Fabric, whatever service you want to use this role for, you must specify the service. If you equally want to create this role for an account, you maybe want to choose the account, and then they'll ask, is the role for this account or is the role for another AWS account? You can choose the role is for this AWS, another AWS account, and then you give the account ID, and then you require maybe MFA and all that. So this is how you create. You must select the trusted entity. The role is maybe for a service. You choose a service, and then you take next. Once you take next, you should be able to add set of permissions. What permissions does this role have? What permissions does this role have? The role might have administrator access. The role might have Alexa full access. The role might have API gateway. All permissions that you want this role to have, you select those permissions, and after selecting those permissions, you take next. And once you take next, you give the role a name, maybe test role. Once you give this role a name, all you need to do is click on create role, and the role will be created. So this way you've been able to create roles, and this role actually grants permissions to services or to resources on the AWS console. So to view the role, you click on view role, and then you have access to this role. If you don't want the role, you can delete the role. Simply you give the name of the role, test roles, and then you choose delete, and that will automatically delete the role. Now, the next very important thing we should take note of is policies. A policy is an object in AWS that defines permission. So once you have policies, policies basically are the ways which you define permissions on AWS. And for you to create a policy, you click on create policy. Creating a policy is actually by you granting specific permissions. And for you to grant specific permission, you can add permissions by selecting services, actions, and resources that actually have access to this. You can add the policy visually, or you can use the JSON format, where in the JSON format, maybe if you want to have access to an account, you can specify an account, and then you would say any, or you can say this policy is to delete alternate contact, and it gives you the equivalent JSON command. Or you can use visual, where you choose a service. You can say once you've added the service S3, you want to specify all actions for S3, and then you want to specify all resources that want to access S3 using this permission. You now take next. Once you take next, you give the policy name. You can give the policy S3 full access. This policy means you grant full access to all S3 resources for any role that assumes this policy. And then once that is good, you create policy, and then you have access to all the S3 services that have been specified by this policy. So this is the policy S3 full access, or these are a set of policies that already exist in your environment. For you to check, you can check policies by all types, or you can choose customer managed policies which you created. And for policies which you created, you can check the policy which you created, or you can simply view policy here. Once you view policy, you see the permissions that the policy has: S3 full access, all resources, and then you can actually delete the policy if you are not interested in using this policy. So for you to delete, you copy the policy name S3 full access, you copy the policy name, you paste the policy name, and then you delete. That will give you the possibility to delete that policy. And that is it for policies. So the last important thing we should understand as far as IAM is concerned is account settings. Account settings basically the ways which you can use to configure access to your account based on policies or based on passwords. So the account helps you to configure the password requirements for all IAM users in your environment. So you can specify the number of the password length for all your users. You can specify the way the password should be made up, and then you can specify password expiry and password rotation. So this is the basics about the IAM service which you must have a good understanding of. We are on the IAM dashboard, and we are going to be doing the various tasks that are comprised in this module. Once you're on the IAM dashboard, you want to take note of the key things which are on IAM. We have user groups, we have users, we have roles, we have policies, identity providers, account settings, access analyzer, external access. Then we have organization, activity, service control policies, and then we also have and then you also want to take note especially of account settings. The first task on this module is to create an IAM user with programmatic access and with console access. So for you to create an IAM user with programmatic access and with console access, you click on users. Once you click on users, you now see list of existing users and you have the possibility to create a new user. So for you to create a new user, you click on create user. Once you click on create user, you give the user name Wanda user. After giving the user name Wanda user, the exercise says you should give the user console access. So for you to give the user console access or management or access to the management console, you click on console access. Now, if you want the user to use identity center, you can specify it, but if you just want to create a user, you click I want to create an IAM user and you choose that button. Now, since you want the user to be able to access the console, you're going to choose if you want to give this user a password which you already have, maybe per your organization, or you want to give the user a custom password. So we are going to give this user a custom password, and if you want to see the password that you're choosing, you can choose show password. And we have certain password requirements. So for you to give this user a certain for you to give this user a password, you must meet this requirement. So let's give the user a password, wonder user at 1 2 3 4. Now, after you've given this user wonder user at 1 2 3 4, all you need to do is choose next. Once you choose next, you might want to add this user to a group, but we don't have that requirement, so we are going to allow this, and then you take next. After creating all of these, you now see the username, wonder user, custom password. Does the user require a password reset after creating the user? If you choose yes, it's going to give the user the possibility to reset the password after they receive that. Now, once that is done, all you need to do is to click on create user. Now you now see that you've been able to create this user. This is the user URL, this is the username, and then this is the user password. You can email this user the verification instructions. So if you want to send this user the instructions to log in, you click on email sign in information and you open up the application or any emailing application which you have in your device. Now that we have this created, all you need to do is to return to user list, and they'll ask you haven't viewed or downloaded this user's password. Do you want to continue? You click continue. So this is the user which you've created. If you want to check the username, the name of the user was Wanda user. This is the user which you've created. You can view more about this user, the user permissions, user groups, user tags, security credentials, and access advisor. You can also add permissions to this user and all that. The second task which you have is to assign an IAM policy to the user, granting specific permissions to S3. So for us to carry out this, we need to come to this user and we see permissions here. So they say we should add the user permissions, add IAM policy to the user, granting specific permissions to an S3 bucket. So all you need to do is to come to users, you search for the username, Wanda user. This is the user. You select the user, and then you come to the user policies. We have the user already has IAM change user password policy, so we are to add the policy for permissions to S3. So all I need to do is to click on add permissions, and then you choose add permissions. They will ask if you want to add the permissions to the user group or to a particular user. So we'll say attach policy directly, and we look for the policy S3. So S3 is a policy that we want to attach to this user. So once you choose S3, you search, you now see S3 full access. So once you choose this, you will give this user S3 permission, and all you need to do is take next, and then you can add permission. So this user now has permissions for S3. So we have Amazon S3 full access permission that you have granted to this user. So you've added one policy. Now, the third step says configure multi-factor authentication for the user using a virtual MFA device. So for you to configure multi-factor authentication for this user, all you need to do is to click on security credentials. You come to multi-factor authentication. You now have no MFA devices are assigned to this user. So for you to add that, you click on assign MFA device, and now they'll ask you the device name. If you want to maybe use your phone, maybe you can say Wonder phone, Now, for you to create an MFA, you can use Authenticator app. You can download Google Authenticator or Microsoft Authenticator, or you can use a security key or hardware token key. But in this case, you can use an Authenticator app. Maybe you can download Google Authenticator or Microsoft Authenticator, and that application will give you the possibility to authenticate to the device. So once you choose Authenticator app and you take next, they are going to give you, once you choose and you take next, you will now see a QR code. Once you take your mobile device, you go to the Google Authenticator app and then you choose add MFA device. You'll give you the possibility to actually scan. And once you scan this code, you'll be able to add MFA device. So they'll give you two codes which you use, and you put those codes and you'll be able to scan MFA device. So I'm going to my phone on my Google Authenticator. So you want to check your Google Authenticator for this particular step. So on my Google Authenticator, I click add, I scan QR code, and then now I select the code, and then they'll ask me to reveal the code. And once you reveal the code, you want to put in the two codes from the authenticator device. So you put in the two codes which you receive, 525653. You want to put it fast so that the codes don't disappear. And then you put in the first code and then you wait. It's going to give you a second code. Once it gives you the second code, you equally input the second code to your device. So the second code we have is 804724. Once you've inputted these two codes correctly, you choose add MFA device, and that device will be added to the user. So you now see that the virtual user has been added, and you can always use this MFA device to actually authenticate user permissions into this AWS account. The next exercise is for you to create an IAM role for EC2 users to access S3 bucket. So for you to carry out this exercise, you come to roles, you click on create role. So I click on create role, and the role is for EC2. So one EC2 users to access S3 bucket. So I choose EC2. Once you choose EC2, you take next. Now they say you should give permissions for S3. So I need to search S3. I search S3. Once you search S3, you see Amazon S3 full access. So any user that will be attached to this role will have S3 full access. Once you select that, you take next. After selecting next, you want to give the role a name. So Wanda role S3 S3 full access. Now this will give any user that this role is attached to full access to S3. So once you do that, once you put in the name of the role, all you need to do is create role. And you see it is creating role, and it has created completely. Wanda role S3 full access created. If you want to view the role, you click on view role, and then you see the role. The role has the permissions Amazon S3 full access added. So this gives the user the possibility to add or to have this role, and any user that is attaching this role will have access to S3. The next exercise is to test this role by assuming it and accessing an AWS resource. So for you to test this role by giving it access to another resource, you can choose EC2. So you type here EC2. Once you type EC2, you are going to see EC2 virtual servers in the cloud. So all you need to do is you right click this, you open it in a new tab, and it's going to open in a new tab. Once it opens in a new tab, you have the EC2 console. We want to attach that role to, or we want to assume that role by an AWS resource. So we want an EC2 instance to have access to that role. So for you to do that, you click on instances. So once you click on instances, you take launch instance, you give the instance names, Wanda instance. After giving the instance name, you can choose your AMI 2022, and then instance type T2 micro, key name, you give any key name, or you just allow it not required. You allow all the security settings the way they are, and then for you to do attachment to the role, you click on advanced settings. Once you choose advanced settings, you can choose IAM instance profile, and all you need to do is to come here, select instance profile. You can now search for the role which you created. Once you search, you will see the role Wanda role S3. Once you see the role Wanda role S3, you attach that role to the instance. You now see that this instance has been added. This instance profile Wanda role S3 full access has been added. Once it is added, you can now launch the instance. Once you select the key pair. If you don't have a key pair, you can create one. But I already have a precision key pair, or you can proceed without a key pair. So I'll proceed without a key pair, and you take launch instance. Once you launch the instance, this EC2 instance has assumed the role which you created. So the instance has a role attached to it. You can view the instance here, and this instance has the IAM role that was assumed by it. So with this instance, you can actually access all S3 resources. The last exercise is to enforce password policies with rotation for IAM users. So for you to enforce password policies with rotation for IAM users, you click on account settings. Once you click on account settings, you'll see password policy. So for you to edit this password policy, or for you to modify this password policy such that it will have 8 characters minimum length, never expired password, all you need to do is to click on edit. Once you click on edit, you can use IAM default password requirements, or you can use a custom password requirements. You can specify every password that is actually going to be used by any IAM user will require 10 characters. You can choose that the password must have at least an uppercase. You can have at least a lowercase, at least one number, at least one alphanumeric number. Now, if you want to enforce rotation, you can choose turn on password expiration. If you want the password to expire after a given number of days, that means after 30 days, this password that the user has will require, or if after 30 days, this password or any password that any user has in the environment will require to be changed. You can specify a password expiration date, and then you can choose that password expiration requires administrator reset, and then you can allow users to change their password, and you can prevent the users from reusing their password. So the user can use a password just twice. So once you create all of these permissions or all of these password policies, you can then save changes. I don't want this in my environment, so I'll not actually save changes. But if you want to enforce a good password policy, you can then save changes. So all these are the basic steps or the basic exercises that you need to understand as far as this IAM module is concerned.